was not a speech. It was not a press conference. It wasn't even a policy memo. It was 10 words, typed at night, posted online, and detonated like a silent bomb across the global auto industry. If you don't make it here, don't sell it here. That single sentence, posted by President Donald John Trump on Truth Social, triggered a 200% tariff on all foreign-made vehicles and auto parts. No warning, no delay, just instant shock. The world didn't wake up to it. The world was woken up by it. Analysts froze. Automaker executives fled boardrooms. Stellantis, more exposed than anyone else, went dark within hours. No press calls, no statements, just silence, and plane tickets to Paris. So what did Stellantis know before the rest of the world caught on? Why was Canada prepared to benefit almost immediately? And is this really a tariff or the start of something far more irreversible? You'll want to see what happens next. Stellantis goes dark. Within 24 hours, Stellantis shut off its public-facing operations, like flipping a switch. Press conferences were canceled, product unveilings scrapped, even social media feeds went silent. The company's internal communications team sent pause all U.S. messaging directives to agencies in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. Memos leaked almost instantly. Stellantis had frozen hiring across all U.S. operations. Plant investment halted. Supplier contract renewals suspended. Engineers in Michigan were told to prepare remote transition documents for alternate facilities. The unspoken message was now brutally clear. Stellantis was retreating. Inside state houses across the industrial Midwest, panic spread faster than cable news coverage. Union representatives from Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois could not get anyone from Stellantis to answer their calls. Rumors of plant closures surged, but the company offered no clarity, just silence. Workers in Toledo were the first to speak out, holding impromptu press briefings outside assembly gates, demanding answers. Then came the shocker. Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, freshly elected and globally respected, publicly backed Stellantis' decision to scale back U.S. operations. Calling the tariffs an economic act of self-harm, Carney extended a direct invitation. Canada would welcome any relocated operations with open arms and taxpayer support. The layoff tsunami begins. The impact hit like a tidal wave. Within the first week of Trump's tariff decree, Stellantis quietly filed worker adjustment and retraining notification notices in multiple states. Over 12,000 layoffs were confirmed, with more expected. The Jeep plant in Detroit's east side was the first to shutter, followed closely by a Dodge facility in Belvidere, Illinois. There was no grace period, no transition aid. Workers were simply told not to report. Some arrived at gates only to find them padlocked, with paper signs instructing them to call a hotline that never answered. Local officials were blindsided. Mayors gave press conferences choking back emotion, saying they had no warning. School districts in auto-dependent counties began forecasting budget shortfalls from vanishing tax revenue. Restaurants, tool shops, auto glass installers, all connected to Stellantis production lines, began laying off staff or shutting down altogether. Then, a leaked recording from a company conference call sent the outrage to another level. In the clip, a Stellantis executive was heard saying the United States had become too volatile to be trusted for long-term investment. The quote went viral. Protesters began gathering outside Stellantis buildings with signs reading, "We built you," and "Too volatile, too profitable." Canada reaps the windfall. As America reeled, Canada mobilized. Within 48 hours of Stellantis' pullback, Prime Minister Carney's administration rolled out a comprehensive economic fast-track package for advanced manufacturing. Ontario and Quebec received immediate subsidies. Permitting timelines were slashed from 18 months to 8 weeks. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation ran wall-to-wall coverage, showing politicians welcoming Stellantis executives to newly opened regional offices. By the second week, something surreal began happening across Michigan and Ohio. Flatbeds with Canadian plates arrived at shuttered U.S. plants. Machinery, robotic welding arms, custom jigs, precision die presses was unbolted, loaded, and driven north. Videos emerged of former U.S. workers watching their own factory equipment leave town under foreign flags. One clip showed a tearful employee standing on the curb as his former workstation passed him by on a trailer headed to Ontario. That image became the unofficial symbol of what many were now calling Detroit's new surrender. Meanwhile, Canadian labor unions celebrated. Unifor, the largest private sector union in Canada, held rallies welcoming the jobs and blasting Trump's policy as gift-wrapped industrial suicide. Social media feeds that once showed Detroit muscle cars now displayed Canadian flags wrapped around Jeep chassis. Now we tracked leaked memos, border footage, and internal union briefings to show you exactly how Canada pulled this off. Fast, quiet, and ruthless. Now you've got the playbook Stellantis used to abandon America in plain sight. If that kind of clarity matters, consider subscribing, because this is just getting started. And through it all, Stellantis remained strategically silent, moving quietly but with unmistakable intent. The Rust Belt cracks. The first shockwaves hit Michigan like a thunderclap, but the fractures didn't stop there. Within days, they spread like fault lines across Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, gutting towns that once pulsed with industrial might. Where the grinding of gears and shouting of foremen once echoed through factory walls, now there was only silence, hollow and heavy. Outside shuttered Stellantis plants. United Auto Workers leaders gathered with bullhorns and fire in their eyes, organizing emergency strikes not out of strategy, but desperation. They held picket signs that read, "Built in America, buried by tariffs." Chants rang out. Campfires burned in 50-gallon drums. But management never showed. There was nothing to negotiate. The jobs weren't paused. They were gone. The blow to suppliers was faster and even more unforgiving. Steel mills across western Pennsylvania shut down their furnaces overnight, sending molten dreams into cold darkness. In Kentucky, glass manufacturers laid off entire shifts by voicemail. An electronics plant in Indiana that built dashboard systems for Jeep vehicles closed its doors with zero warning. Over 2,000 workers left stunned, severance denied, health benefits canceled by morning. Local mayors flooded Washington with pleas for emergency aid. Governors made bipartisan appeals, but the White House held its line. Trump's inner circle stuck to the same hard-edged refrain: short-term pain for long-term sovereignty. To them, it was patriotic medicine. To Wall Street, it was a case of self-inflicted collapse. Economic self-immolation, one analyst wrote bluntly in a memo leaked to the press, and the pain didn't stop at the gates of abandoned plants. It spilled into the fields and roadsides, into the daily lives of farmers, truckers, and small business owners who had long relied on Stellantis-made Ram trucks to run their operations. With parts inventories frozen, those trucks quickly transformed from workhorses into paperweights. Engines failed, transmissions stalled, brakes disintegrated, replacement parts non-existent. Dealerships couldn't help. Mechanics were out of options, dealers left with empty promises. Across the country, Stellantis showrooms became museums of failure. Dodge, Jeep, and Ram dealers stood like ghost towns. Glass temples filled with vehicles no one could afford and no one dared finance. Trucks that had retailed for $45,000 the year before now crept past $60,000, driven not by demand, but by the artificial surge of tariff markups. Even longtime customers walked away, eyes wide, wallets closed. Sales staff tried to stay upbeat, but with each passing week, hope dried up. Floor traffic vanished. Monthly projections were quietly shredded. More than 500 dealerships reported 0 sales days, something unheard of in modern automotive retail. It wasn't inflation that killed the market, it was confusion, chaos, a system gridlocked by policy. Warranty claims went unprocessed for weeks. Technicians were laid off. Phone calls to Stellantis headquarters were met with voicemail loops. Emails bounced. Franchise owners watched their balance sheets bleed red, unsure whether to hang on or fold. In a desperate act of defiance, a coalition of nearly 300 dealerships filed a lawsuit against Stellantis. The claim? Breach of contract, abandonment. Some argued it wasn't just about lost revenue, it was about betrayal. In North Carolina, a Dodge dealership reached a boiling point. Surveillance footage later broadcast on national news showed former employees laid off without warning, storming the showroom in broad daylight. They shattered display windows, spray-painted windshields with the word traitor, and left hand-scrawled cardboard signs reading, "You left us first." As the footage went viral, it struck a nerve. These weren't criminals. They were fathers, mothers, mechanics, finance clerks, people who had built their lives around Stellantis. The emotional dam had burst. Meanwhile, lenders were drowning in bad debt. Truck owners with six-figure loans began defaulting in droves. Auto finance companies scrambled to recover assets. Repossession agents worked double shifts. But for every truck they towed, 2 more sat untouched on gravel lots. Too expensive to sell, too costly to keep. The press conference that lit a match. Then came the speech. Trump appeared in Ohio, flanked by American flags, hard-hatted supporters, and the unmistakable bravado of a political firestorm. The moment was crafted to reassure, but it did the opposite. "We are saving American jobs. Whether the globalists like it or not, he bellowed, and if Stellantis wants to walk away, let them. We'll build better without. He didn't just criticize Stellantis. He accused them of treason, of conspiring with foreign powers. He vowed to punish any company that dared shift operations offshore, teasing sweeping legislation to blacklist offenders from government contracts and federal incentives. The crowd roared. The nation flinched. Reporters pressed him about the job losses, the economic fallout, the lawsuits, fake numbers, fake news. He snapped. The soundbite hit national television within minutes, and social media caught fire. Soon, hashtags like "Yeah, boycott Stellantis," "Yeah, tariff traitor," and "Buy American only" began trending. Influencers weighed in. YouTubers posted fiery rants. A viral TikTok of a young couple abandoning their Ram truck at a dealership racked up 10 million views in 2 days. Yet, beneath the bluster, a grim realization began to set in. There were no easy fixes, no domestic backups, no homegrown factories ready to fill the gap. The trucks weren't coming, the pipelines were dry. Even the flag waving felt hollow when set against empty shelves and unpaid bills. Then came the international twist. During a press conference in Ottawa, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped into the spotlight. In a calm, calculated tone, he extended an olive branch to disillusioned American workers. Canada, he announced, would be offering accelerated work visas, retraining programs, and manufacturing jobs for any skilled laborers willing to relocate north. The move shocked Washington. While Trump threatened corporations, Carney welcomed workers. His message was direct. If your country won't invest in you, we will. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. The image of Canadian flags rising while American ones frayed in the wind was not lost on international media. Mexico strikes back. As the United States unraveled, Mexico struck its own chord. In Mexico City, government officials filed a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, calling Trump's new tariffs an act of unilateral aggression. The legal brief described them as a direct violation of free trade principles and demanded swift arbitration. On the ground, something even more unexpected unfolded. Stellantis workers in Toluca and Saltillo staged spontaneous solidarity strikes, standing shoulder to shoulder with their American counterparts. Photos went viral. Mexican workers holding bilingual signs that read, "We build together," and "El futuro no tiene fronteras." It was a powerful moment of unity. It didn't last. Within 48 hours, Stellantis began replacing the striking workers with non-union labor. Hiring notices appeared online. Buses rolled in. Production resumed at breakneck speed, not for the United States, but for Europe, Asia, and South America. The message was unmistakable. Stellantis had moved on. Outraged by the treatment of its labor force, Mexico's government ramped up its rhetoric. "This is not economic policy. It's colonial behavior dressed up in patriotism," said one trade minister. Behind closed doors, officials began coordinating with Canadian and European counterparts to isolate U.S. supply chains, slowly turning America's trade war into a global siege. Back in Detroit, boardrooms at Ford and General Motors grew tense. Publicly, they stayed silent. Privately, they were making calls to Monterrey and Querétaro. If Stellantis could shift south and survive, perhaps they could too. And it didn't stop at autos. Executives from Deere, Caterpillar, and even Tesla flooded Capitol Hill with confidential memos, think tank funding, and policy briefings, not because they disagreed with nationalism, but because they feared collapse. These weren't political protests. They were corporate SOS signals. Some still believed in reshoring, but none believed in burning the system to the ground, not even for the flag, not even for Trump. The corporate exodus expands. As Washington dug in, the rest of the world moved on. Stellantis didn't just pause investment in the United States, it reversed it entirely. Peugeot, Citroën, and Fiat, all brands under the Stellantis umbrella, halted their U.S. expansion plans within 72 hours of Trump's tariff order. Their American marketing campaigns vanished. Job postings disappeared. Leases were canceled on logistics hubs from Texas to New Jersey. Industry insiders coined a new term, reverse offshoring. Instead of American jobs heading abroad, it was now foreign companies abandoning the American market altogether. And it wasn't just Stellantis. Within weeks, other European automakers began quietly scaling down their presence. Opel pulled out of a planned U.S. re-entry. Renault postponed its American electric vehicle launch indefinitely. The impact was immediate. Over 40,000 auto-adjacent jobs jobs were lost in just 90 days. Parts suppliers shut down entire divisions. Port authorities reported steep declines in incoming automotive freight. Entire rail networks fell idle. In leaked emails, Stellantis executives confirmed what many feared. They were now actively lobbying the European Union to impose retaliatory sanctions against the United States. The logic was brutal. If America would target their trade, then the EU would make America bleed exports in return. Canada's revenge is calculated. While the US tried to contain the fallout, Mark Carney orchestrated a diplomatic masterstroke. The Canadian Prime Minister convened a closed-door meeting in Toronto with top trade envoys from Mexico, Germany, and the European Union. His pitch was simple. The US had destabilized the continent's economy. It was time to build a new alliance. Within days, Carney unveiled the North American Fair Trade Pact, a trilateral agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the European Union that deliberately excluded the United States. The new pact offered streamlined logistics, reduced customs friction, and priority trade lanes for industrial goods. Canadian Parliament fast-tracked mirror tariffs on American-made farm equipment, diesel engines, and auto components. Exports from Deere, Caterpillar, and GM faced instant cost spikes. Suddenly, American machinery became uncompetitive in key markets. The blow to agriculture was especially harsh. U.S. grain exports stalled as Canadian ports refused to process shipments. Thousands of tons of soybeans and corn sat rotting in storage across the Midwest. Carney framed it not as retaliation, but as economic self-defense. Stellantis breaks its silence. Until this point, Stellantis had refused to issue public statements. That changed during a tense Paris press event live-streamed across Europe. Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares finally addressed the crisis directly. His message pulled no punches. The United States is no longer a viable market for predictable investment, he said. The recent tariff policies have made stable production impossible, and we can no longer subject our shareholders, suppliers, or workers to this chaos. He then unveiled the company's pivot, $6 billion in new investments, none of it destined for American soil. The money would fund new plants in Brazil, Poland, Morocco, and India. North America, he said, would be served exclusively by Canada and Mexico moving forward. The blow to American credibility was catastrophic. U.S. ambassadors labeled the speech corporate betrayal. European leaders clapped. Global investors cheered. Within hours, Stellantis stock rebounded to its pre-tariff levels. Back in Washington, Trump's reaction was as immediate as it was severe. He issued an executive order to bar Stellantis from any future federal fleet contracts, including postal vehicles and Department of Defense orders. He ended the statement with a single line: "We don't reward traitors." But while Stellantis walked away with applause, Washington was imploding. What began as economic posturing was now a full-blown political crisis. White House meltdown. The administration's internal unity began to crack. Top economic advisors clashed over how to handle the unfolding crisis. Some urged a quick reversal of the tariffs. Others wanted to double down. Trump refused to flinch. He called the losses temporary, blamed the media, and suggested most jobs would return when companies learned their lesson. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Former allies on Wall Street began turning. Hedge fund giants that once supported Trump's America First policy began liquidating positions in manufacturing and shifting their portfolios abroad. A group of Senate Republicans, previously silent, began drafting emergency legislation to override the tariffs and restore market stability. The proposed bill included measures to incentivize reshoring while protecting supply chains through phased tariff rollout. But when the draft reached Trump's desk, he shredded it during a live staff meeting. Then came the leak. A New York Times investigative report exposed a confidential White House memo titled "Make Detroit Kneel." The document outlined a strategy to apply economic pressure to automakers seen as disloyal to the administration, including threats to cancel defense contracts, delay permits, and restrict patent approvals. Public trust collapsed. International media ran with the headline. American credibility eroded even further. Wall Street delivered its final judgment. The Dow Jones Industrial Average collapsed by 3,000 points in a single day, the worst drop since the financial crisis of 2008. Pension funds, retirement portfolios, and municipal bonds all cratered. And yet, through the wreckage, Trump held a press conference. "We're rebuilding this country one broken piece at a time," he declared. Main Street burns. Across the American heartland, it was no longer just an economic downturn. It was a full-blown collapse. In rural towns from Indiana to Illinois, Main Street began to buckle under the weight of lost industry. Stellantis factories had once anchored entire communities. Now those communities were unraveling. Home foreclosures surged. Food banks reported record demand. Suicide hotlines were overwhelmed, particularly in counties where Jeep and Ram plants had shut down. Police departments, stripped of funding from declining local tax bases, began auctioning off seized Dodge trucks just to meet payroll. Some areas, even public school budgets faced emergency cuts, triggering teacher layoffs and canceled programs. Everyday life had shifted from uncertainty to desperation. With no federal relief plan and no clear manufacturing replacement strategy, the American industrial engine sputtered into irrelevance. Trump, speaking at a rally in North Carolina, blamed coastal elites and globalist banks for manipulating the narrative. "This is pain with a purpose," he shouted. "Factories will rise again, but only if we stop kneeling to foreign interests." The words rang hollow to communities watching their futures disappear in real time. America turns on itself. Protest wasn't a movement anymore. It was a necessity. Across the country, everyday Americans who once considered themselves apolitical were suddenly taking to the streets, the highways, and the Capitol steps. What began as a scattered response to soaring prices and empty lots morphed into a full-scale uprising. Farmers from the Midwest rolled into Washington, D.C. in caravans of tractors, clogging federal boulevards in a display of rural fury not seen since the farm crisis of the 1980s. Truckers, many of whom had been on the road for decades, turned their 18-wheelers into barricades, blocking off critical arteries of the interstate highway system. One sign duct taped to the grill of a stopped semi captured the spirit of the rebellion in 8 words: "No parts, no pay, no peace." That wasn't hyperbole. It was the raw, unfiltered truth. Their livelihoods were imploding, and no one in Washington seemed to care. A move that shocked the legal establishment. Governors in key manufacturing states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania issued executive defiance orders. They bypassed federal customs enforcement and authorized emergency import permits for foreign auto parts and industrial materials. These acts were direct violations of President Trump's sweeping 200% tariff edict, but the governors were unapologetic. "If D.C. won't save our jobs, we will," declared Ohio's governor during a press conference surrounded by laid-off workers. The standoff escalated fast. Federal agents attempted to seize unauthorized shipments at state-controlled ports, only to be blocked by state troopers acting on gubernatorial orders. At one Michigan port, both sides drew weapons. Though no shots were fired, the symbolism was explosive. America wasn't just divided, it was in open conflict with itself. Then came the political shockwave that no one had predicted. A bipartisan poll conducted by Gallup and the Pew Research Center revealed a seismic shift in public opinion. 64% of Republican voters now opposed the tariffs outright. Even among Trump's core base, frustration was boiling over. Conservative talk radio hosts, who had spent years defending the administration, began asking difficult questions. Fox News ran a segment titled, "Have Tariffs Gone Too Far?" A week later, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board published an op-ed calling Trump's trade strategy economic self-sabotage. Into this chaos stepped Senator Karen Weiland, a rising star in the Republican Party who had built her brand on economic pragmatism and populist restraint. She introduced a new bill, the Economic Realignment Act, a sweeping piece of legislation designed to revoke the executive branch's unilateral power to enact tariffs without congressional approval. Her floor speech was carried live across every major television network. "If we can no longer feed our children, employ our citizens, or protect our industries because of one man's ego," she declared, "then we no longer have a republic. We have a monarchy." Weiland's bill picked up momentum at record speed. Within 72 hours, it had over 100 co-sponsors from both parties. Lobbyists scrambled to contain the fallout, but they were too late. The revolt had become institutional, Stellantis' endgame. While America tore itself apart, Stellantis moved like a machine with a war plan. The company, once headquartered in Auburn Hills, Michigan, had already gone cold. Its North American operations had been reduced to legal shell entities, just enough presence to comply with financial disclosure laws. The buildings were shuttered, parking lots were empty, the signs had been taken down. But overseas, Stellantis was thriving. The company had finalized multiple multi-billion-dollar investment deals in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. These weren't speculative plays. They were immediate, active deployments. In Brazil, they broke ground on a new electric vehicle plant designed to employ over 22,000 workers. In Nigeria, Stellantis invested in low-cost modular manufacturing hubs and partnered with regional logistics providers to bypass shipping bottlenecks. In Vietnam, it secured lithium contracts that guaranteed battery supply for the next decade, locking out both European and American competitors. Stellantis wasn't fleeing America. It had replaced America. By the time lawmakers grasped the scope of Stellantis' exit, it was too late. The American auto industry fractured overnight. Tesla hired former Stellantis engineers via Canadian recruiters, while U.S. workers looked north for jobs. Middle-class families could no longer afford cars. Dealerships emptied. Imports surged from China, Germany, and Vietnam. Trump doubled down, proclaiming, "Make America Great Again." Wall Street shrugged. Economists warned of a $100 billion blow to gross domestic product. Manufacturing dreams turned into boutique fantasies for the rich. America, once the world's factory, stood broken. And a chilling question remained. What future is there left to fight for? Is this the breaking point for American manufacturing, or just the beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening closely, and thank you for watching.